All right, let's get started with the first conversation today. It's not necessarily an easy conversation to have, but I think certainly it's one of the most important from the perspective of financial planning. The pandemic that came so suddenly reminded quite a few of us of our mortality. And in some situations, it came at a time when people were just not ready for it. And that's why succession planning is one of the most important things that you will do, especially when you cross a certain age. This is the first conversation that we're going to have today. We're going to talk about the regulations as they currently stand, everything that you need to know about, what are the various steps that you need to follow in order to make sure that there are no hassles down the road. And we'll also talk about what happens in a situation where you don't do that. Joining me now is Harsh Roongta, the Chief Executive Officer at Fee Only Investment Advisors. Thank you so much, Harsh, for taking the time. Now, I don't want to tell you that first I want to talk about the regulations as they stand, and then maybe down the line as we progress in this program, we'll talk about what can be done in the future. But let's talk about the current scenario. What are the current regulations that govern succession?
So, regulations, effectively, succession would happen. If you leave a will, it would happen as per the will. If there is no will, then it is dependent on the personal laws governing a specific individual. So that is as far as succession itself is concerned. But there is an intermediate way, definitely, for movable assets and for many other kinds of immovable assets as well, which is nominations. So you could nominate somebody who would receive it on the death of the holder and would be able to give a discharge to the institution, the bank or the mutual fund house, or whether it is the DP operation, the DMAT corporation. So to them, that nominee is able to give a discharge, but in most cases, the nominee holds it then in custody or as a trustee for the legal heirs that will be determined, as I said, as per either a will, or if there is no will, then as per the personal law governing that person.
Understood. Now, according to you, Harsh, in the various conversations that you've had, what are the mistakes that people make? And why is it so important to talk about nomination, to talk about succession planning?
I think the biggest mistake that people make is not even thinking about this. The reason we are sitting here discussing this subject today is, as you mentioned, that this pandemic has actually thrust mortality in our faces, and that's why it's a topic that can actually go on a money show. Otherwise, it appears that people never die or that we will never die. So I think that is really the major mistake. The second is not doing nominations. At least by doing nominations, you can ensure that the people you want to have access to whatever you have. See, you worked very hard, you have gathered a lot of resources. You then want to make sure that when something happens to you, when you die, it goes to the people that you want it to go to. So you make nominations so that it is simple for them to get it, and then you make a will to make sure those nominations are affirmed, and that becomes the eventual disbursement of your estate. And make sure that wherever whomsoever you have nominated is mentioned as a beneficiary in the will as well.
So there are two stages as I understand it, Harsh, and let's break this up. The nomination, of course, is for every asset that you have, I would think, both financial and otherwise. And the will comes in to ensure that you can choose, you can pick and choose which person gets it. So if you have more than one nominee, you can choose, for example, to give a certain asset to one and a certain asset to the other. You can choose how to disburse whatever you have. Is that right?
That's right. So in a simple way, nominations ensures that somebody gets it as a caretaker, and they get it quickly and very fast. In the case of financial assets, that's the first part. The will makes sure that either the ultimate beneficiary is the caretaker, in which case things just get smoothened out, or at his option or her option, they can have a different final beneficiary as well. But it is ideal that the caretaker and the final beneficiary, if they are the same, then the process remains very smooth. The nomination itself gives it to the caretaker, who ultimately becomes the final beneficiary. So the process is very seamless.
Okay. I want to understand now, at what stage do you do these things? Very clearly now, for example, and if you can differentiate between the assets, that would be very helpful. If you're talking about a fixed deposit or a bank account, then there's a clear process. The bank themselves ask you. If you're talking about a mutual fund scheme, when you're making the investment itself, you have the option of choosing a nominee. So ideally, I would think that you do it at that stage itself, and if you haven't done it, you should go ahead and make sure that at least you have a nominee. But at what stage would you say in your lifespan should you consider making a will, and how do you go about doing it?
So will and nominations, two different things. Nominations, obviously you should make it as soon as you get that asset on which a nomination is possible. By and large, all financial assets allow you to nominate. There would be some non-financial assets where nomination may not be possible, but financial assets, every asset allows you to nominate. So I think you do it when you get into when you open a bank account, open a demat account, buy a mutual fund unit, you just make sure that you have your nomination in place. As far as the will is concerned, I think you should make that will when you start earning it. There is no earthly reason for you not to make that will. You can change it as your life situation changes. You get married, you can change it. You get children, then you can change it. If anything else changes in your life, you can change it. And I think one of the things which you will discuss probably later on with Mr. Pramod Rao, he's written a brilliant paper on white paper on nominations, and reimagining the nominations process, so to make that succession smoother and simpler. And I think he will talk about how that reimagination can happen, so that you may not have to do two things. You just do the nominations, and that can sort of become the that will ensure the succession also.
Because as things stand right now, then you would follow different rules, right? If there are separate laws that govern. If there is no nomination done, and if there is no will, then you have to have a pretty long, drawn-out process of identifying who gets what. Is that not the case?
Oh, absolutely. And it is a tedious, cumbersome, and expensive process. And that is if there is no dispute. If there is a dispute, it can be even more tedious, even more expensive, and even more long drawn. So you're absolutely right. Basic financial responsibility dictates that a person should make sure that he nominates at least. So I think that's an extremely important thing to do.
I do want to ask you this because I think a lot of people wonder this. When it comes to making a will, Harsh, is it really a very complicated process? Because I think people have this idea that it needs to be this very formal document. How does one do it? You can effectively go and get it notarized, but you don't necessarily have to, right?
So I think Mr. Pramod Rao would be the right person to answer these questions. But basically, The will can be a handwritten document. It can be in any language. It need not be in English. There are certain basic things that it needs to ensure that, it needs to be in writing. Okay. It need not be registered. It need not be notarized. Okay. It needs to have two witnesses who should have seen you signing it. But beyond that, even a one sentence, I'm not recommending it, please, but even just one sentence, everything I have, I leave to. Okay. Probably that's a will as well. I mean, lawyers would be better able to answer that. But it is as simple as that. And you can write it in your own spoken language. It need not even be English.
Absolutely. I will definitely carry this conversation forward, and it's good that we have Pramod Rao joining in next. And yes, I completely understand. You can change your will at a later date. Thank you so much, Harsh, for setting the context and putting all of this in perspective, because I think the next conversation that we have is going to add a little bit more light about how things can change and the legal aspects that you were just mentioning. Thank you so much once again for taking the time.
Thank you.